The town of Willow Creek had seen hardship before, recessions, storms, failing farms, but no one expected that the biggest shock the community had witnessed in years would begin with a broke single mother, a dying foal, and $220 she absolutely could not afford to lose. Yet there Emma stood, trembling fingers wrapped around a bidding paddle, while strangers whispered that she was reckless, irresponsible, desperate. Maybe she was. But what happened next, what that weak, shaking foal would eventually reveal, would change not only her life, but the entire town's perception of her forever. Some said it was luck, others said it was fate, but those who were there, they knew better. Emma had seen something in that foal no one else dared to see. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe for more true-to-life stories like this. And tell me, where are you watching from? I want to see how far these stories are traveling. Emma Carter had gotten used to doing math in her head, fast, anxious math, the kind single mothers learn when every dollar has a destination before it even reaches their hands. The worn-out calculator app on her cracked phone reflected her reality. $19 left in her checking account and $200 in cash folded into the back pocket of her jeans. That was all she had to stretch through the week for food, gas, and whatever unexpected emergencies life liked to throw her way. It was a quiet, chilly morning in rural Idaho, with thin frost clinging to the grass and the sky still pale from dawn. Emma drove her aging pickup along a 2-lane road surrounded by endless fields, thinking about her kids, 8-year-old Lucas and 5-year-old June, who were still asleep when she left. She planned to stop at the food pantry after picking up a friend's old space heater. The small rental house they lived in was drafty, and the cold had begun creeping under the doors at night. But life has a habit of shifting direction when we least expect it. As she passed the Willow Creek livestock auction grounds, a cluster of worn barns, metal gates, and dusty parking lots, she saw a crowd gathering. At first, she kept driving. Auctions weren't for her. She couldn't even afford feed for a goldfish, much less a farm animal. Yet something made her slow down. A group of people had formed a loose circle near one of the outdoor pens. Their faces were turned toward something small. Emma's foot pressed the brake before her mind caught up. The truck rolled to a stop, engine rumbling, her breath forming a faint cloud in the cold air. She shouldn't go in. She had responsibilities waiting at home. She needed to stretch every cent. But curiosity, no, concern, pulled her across the gravel lot and toward the pen. Inside stood a foal, barely standing. He was thin to the point of fragility, his ribs visible beneath patchy, dull chestnut fur. The little horse trembled, each breath shallow and labored. His legs wobbled unsteadily, as if the weight of his own body was too much for him. A rancher beside Emma shook his head. "Poor thing won't make it through the week," he muttered. "Gonna sell for peanuts. No one wants that liability." 2 men nearby laughed. "Whoever buys him is throwing money straight in the trash." Emma's chest tightened. Trash. They called him trash. But when the foal lifted his head, his eyes met hers, tired, scared, but pleading in a way that hit Emma deeper than she expected. Something about that look. It mirrored the same desperate exhaustion she'd seen in the mirror countless nights after the kids were asleep. A voice over the loudspeaker boomed, "Lot 47, weak yearling colt, starting bid, $200. A few snickers rippled through the crowd. No one raised a hand. Emma swallowed hard. $200. That was nearly all she had. She should walk away, she should go home, she should think of her children, but something rooted her to the dirt beneath her feet. Something louder than fear, sharper than logic. She felt it in her stomach, her chest, her throat. Her hand rose before she realized it. A murmur spread instantly. The auctioneer blinked in surprise. "We have $200. Any other bids?" Silence. Going once and going twice. Emma's heart pounded so loud she thought the whole arena could hear it. Sold. The gavel cracked down like a thunderclap. People stared at her, some in pity, some in ridicule, some in confusion. A woman whispered, "Does she even know what she's doing?" A man shook his head and muttered, "She'll regret that. Maybe she would." But as Emma stepped into the pen and approached the frail little colt, he took a shaky step toward her, not away, but toward, and rested his bony forehead gently against her jacket. Something in her broke, something in her healed, she wasn't sure which. But the process of transferring ownership was quick, almost too quick for the weight of the decision she had just made. Soon she was guiding the foal toward her truck, praying silently that he was light enough for the small livestock trailer her neighbor had loaned her. By the time she pulled into her driveway, the morning had warmed slightly, melting the frost into glistening droplets on the fence posts. The small farmhouse Emma rented was old but charming, with chipped paint and a leaning porch that creaked under any weight. She led the colt to the modest barn behind the house, more of a large shed than a barn, and spread fresh hay across the floor. Her kids would wake up soon. They would have questions. She had no answers. Inside, she warmed a pan of oatmeal and tried to steady her shaking hands. Lucas was the first to appear, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Mum, why are you up so early?" She hesitated. Had to pick something up. June toddled in next, dragging her blanket. "What is it?" A soft whinny drifted from outside. 2 sets of eyes widened. Within minutes, Emma stood with her children beside the colt. Lucas stared with a mix of awe and concern. "Mom, he's really skinny." "I know," she whispered. "Are we keeping him?" June asked, hopeful but uncertain. Emma took a slow breath. "Yes, we're going to help him get better." It felt terrifying to say, but it also felt right. As the day went on, Emma cleaned the colt's wounds, brushed his fur and fed him warm mash in small portions. Though weak, he leaned into her touch as if he understood she was trying to help. By evening he seemed slightly steadier on his legs, and Emma, exhausted but strangely peaceful, sat on a bale of hay watching him. She couldn't explain it. Not to her kids, not to herself, not to anyone. But something deep down told her that saving this foal wasn't a mistake. It was the beginning of something that would soon reveal a truth hidden for years, a truth buried closer to home than she ever imagined. The next morning, the sun rose over Willow Creek with a streak of pale orange cutting across the sky. A thin fog clung to the pastures, and the air smelled of damp earth, the kind of quiet Idaho morning that usually brought Emma a small sense of peace. Not today. She had barely slept, checking on the colt every hour to make sure he was breathing. The barn was still cold despite the heat lamp she'd scavenged from a garage sale last summer, and every time he shivered, her stomach tightened. By 6 a.m., she was back out there, still wearing the same sweatshirt from the night before, hair tied in a messy knot. The colt lifted his head weakly when she entered. "Hey, buddy," she murmured, kneeling beside him. "You're still with me. That's a good start." Lucas appeared in the doorway, dressed for school, but fiddling with the straps of his backpack. "Mom, is he gonna make it?" His voice was small, the way it always was when he wasn't sure if he should hope for something. "I don't know," she admitted gently, "but we're going to do everything we can." Lucas nodded and sat beside her, watching the colt breathe. "He needs a name." Emma smiled faintly. "Yeah, he probably does." June soon joined them, clutching her stuffed rabbit. The little girl's eyes softened as she approached the foal. She reached out slowly, and the colt, trembling, tired, leaned forward just enough to brush her hand with his muzzle. "He's sweet," June whispered. "He's trying. That's all any of them ever did. By the time Emma dropped the kids at school, whispers were already circulating. Willow Creek was a small town. Bad news traveled fast, and confusing news traveled even faster. At the gas station, 2 women near the coffee machine paused mid-conversation when Emma walked in. "She used her last dollars on that horse," one whispered. "I heard it won't survive the week," the other added. What was she thinking? Emma kept her eyes down, paid for $10 worth of gas, all she could spare, and left. She tried to shake off their judgment, but their voices clung to her like burrs. She wasn't impulsive. She wasn't irresponsible. She was desperate, hopeful, something in between. The truth was, she didn't know why she'd done it. Not fully. Not yet. By mid-morning, trouble arrived in the form of a dusty blue pickup pulling into her driveway. The vehicle belonged to Hank Morrissey, a rancher in his late 60s and one of the most respected cattlemen in the county. He had the kind of posture that looked carved from old fence posts, rigid, weathered, and impossible to move. Emma's stomach dropped. If the town was talking, Hank had heard it. He stepped out of his truck, adjusting his worn hat. "Morning, Emma." "Morning," she replied cautiously. "Heard you brought home a colt from yesterday's auction." Word traveled faster than wildfire. She nodded. "Yeah, he's in the barn." Hank didn't say anything else, just motioned for her to lead the way. Inside the barn, the colt lifted his head weakly. Hank studied him without speaking, crouching down to inspect his legs, teeth, and breathing. Emma waited, heart pounding. After a long silence, Hank exhaled through his nose, not quite disapproval, but close. "He's real bad off," he said plainly. "Malnourished, dehydrated, wormy, might have been sick for weeks." Emma's shoulders sagged. "Is there anything I can do?" Hank looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time, His expression wasn't stern, but concerned. "You got heart, Emma," he said softly. Not a lot of folks would have taken him in. His words surprised her. He stood and dusted off his jeans. "I've got some extra antibiotics and electrolytes. I'll bring 'em by this afternoon. Won't charge you." Emma blinked. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he replied. "But that colt's got a spark. Most in his condition would have given up. He hasn't." She swallowed hard. "Thank you, Hank." "Really?" He tipped his hat. "Don't thank me yet. Long way to go." As he left the barn, Emma rested a hand on the colt's neck. "You hear that? You've got spark." The colt shifted slightly and gave a soft exhale, leaning into her touch. Over the next few hours, Emma worked non-stop. She cleaned the colt's stall, prepared warm mash, and mixed electrolyte solutions the way Hank had shown her. Every time she knelt beside the foal, he watched her with those dark, weary eyes that seemed to understand she was fighting for him. She still hadn't named him. Naming him felt like admitting he might survive. Naming him felt like hope, and hope was dangerous when you were barely holding your life together. But as she rubbed his neck and felt him relax slightly beneath her hand, the name surfaced before she could stop it. "Chance," she whispered, "because that's what you are, a chance and for something better." The colt's ears flicked. Emma smiled. It fit. By early afternoon, Emma walked to the mailbox, expecting nothing more than junk mail and overdue notices. Instead, she found an envelope from the county office, the kind with a red stamp in the corner. Her throat tightened. She tore it open right there at the mailbox. The words hit her like a punch. Final notice. Property, assessment, discrepancy. Immediate action required. Potential lien pending. Her heart hammered. No, not now. Not when things were already stretched so thin she could barely breathe. She read the notice again, slower this time, trying to make sense of it. The letter claimed there was an unresolved issue regarding the property line behind her barn, a claim someone had filed, a claim that, if validated, could cost her thousands. Thousands she didn't have. Emma staggered back a step, gripping the paper. "Why now?" she whispered. The wind carried no answer. She folded the notice with shaking hands and stuffed it into her jacket. The barn suddenly felt much farther away. The future felt heavier. Her choices, all of them, felt reckless and impossible. But when she stepped back inside the barn, Chance lifted his head, ears twitching, as if he sensed her distress. He pushed his nose lightly against her arm, a gesture so small, so gentle, it nearly broke her. "You're not making this any easier, buddy," she whispered. "But you're worth it. I'm not giving up on you." She wasn't sure whether she was making a promise to him or to herself, maybe both. But she didn't know yet that this frail colt, this gamble everyone mocked, would soon lead her straight to the center of the property dispute, and what he uncovered would shake the entire town. The morning after the notice arrived, Emma stood in the barn doorway with a heaviness that didn't come from lack of sleep alone. A cold draft slipped through the loose boards, ruffling the straw and brushing against her legs. Chance lay curled in the corner, his breathing slow but steadier than the day before. When he lifted his head and blinked at her, a small wave of relief washed through her chest. "You're looking a little stronger today," she murmured, stepping inside and kneeling beside him. She checked his temperature the way Hank had shown her and ran her hand down his neck. Chance pressed his frail body closer, as if the contact steadied him. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe. The letter from the county still sat on the kitchen table, unopened for a second time. She couldn't bear to look at it again. Not yet. The sound of footsteps crunching across the frosty ground startled her. She turned to see her neighbor, Lydia Harper, approaching with a thermos in one hand and her usual messy ponytail bobbing behind her. Lydia was the kind of person who showed up in emergencies with casserole dishes and unsolicited advice, someone whose heart often outran her tact. "I heard about the colt," Lydia said before Emma even greeted her. "And the letter." Emma stiffened. In Willow Creek, privacy was a luxury no one really owned. "Who told you?" "Karen at the post office," Lydia said unapologetically. "She saw the red stamp and nearly sprinted to call me." "Of course she did." Lydia stepped into the barn and immediately softened at the sight of Chance. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, crouching beside him. "You look better than you did yesterday. That's something." Emma folded her arms. "I'm doing everything I can." "I know you are," Lydia replied, glancing up at her. "But you don't have to pretend everything's fine. That notice is serious. They don't send those out unless someone is pushing it." "I know," Emma whispered, her throat tightening. "But I can't deal with all of it at once, not today." Lydia hesitated before placing a hand on Emma's arm. "You're not alone, okay? If you need help, if you need someone to watch the kids or make calls, I'm okay." Emma cut in gently but firmly. "Really, I just need a minute to figure things out." Lydia studied her, recognizing the tone of someone holding themselves together by thread. She nodded slowly. "All right, but I'm close by if anything changes." She gave Chance a final gentle stroke and headed out, leaving the barn quiet once again. Emma sank onto a bale of hay, the exhaustion finally settling into her bones. She wasn't ready to face the county office. She wasn't ready to explain to her children that the place they lived might not be theirs for much longer. She wasn't ready for any of it. Chance shifted slightly, nudging her knee. She looked down at him, stunned by how something so weak could still carry so much determination in its eyes. "You really do have no idea what kind of mess you walked into," she said softly, brushing her fingers over his dusty fur. "Or maybe you do." The rest of the morning passed quietly. Emma fed Chance small, frequent meals, cleaned the stalls, and tried not to think about everything weighing on her shoulders. The kids came home from school bursting with questions, but she managed to distract them with homework and hot chocolate. For a few hours, life felt almost normal. Just before sunset, Hank's blue pickup rolled into the driveway again. Emma stepped out of the barn to meet him. The sky behind him blazed with streaks of orange and purple, the kind of view that usually made her pause. Today, she barely noticed. "I brought the meds," Hank said, lifting a small cooler from the passenger seat, "and figured I'd check on him." They walked into the barn together. Chance lifted his head weakly, and Hank nodded approvingly. "He's hanging on better than I expected," he said. "Good sign. Most colts in this state either go downhill fast or give a fight. Looks like he's choosing the second option." Emma managed a small smile. "He's tougher than he looks." Hank unpacked the cooler, handing Emma a syringe. "Twice a day for 3 days. We'll see how he responds." As she prepared the dose, Hank studied her face. "You holding up all right?" His tone gave her away before she had a chance to hide it. She hesitated. "I got a notice from the county, something about a dispute with the property line." Hank's brows lowered. "Let me guess. Behind the barn?" Emma froze. "Yes. How did you know?" Hank scratched his jaw, sighing through his nose. "Because that same strip of land has caused arguments for 20 years. Old survey records got mixed up back when the last owner passed. Lines were drawn wrong. Folks have been poking at it ever since." Emma gripped the syringe a little tighter. "The letter said they might put a lien on the property." Hank nodded grimly. "That's their way of scaring people into action. But listen, don't panic yet. Most of the time these claims don't go anywhere unless someone's really pushing it and paying for it." "Who would even do that?" Emma whispered. Hank didn't answer right away. His silence said enough. Someone wanted that land. Someone was willing to stir up trouble to get it. He cleared his throat. "Take care of the colt. I'll make some calls, see what I can find out." After he gave a final nod and walked out, Emma injected the antibiotics into Chance's neck. He flinched, but didn't fight. When she finished, he let out a tired sigh and leaned into her shoulder. "You're not the only one in trouble," she whispered into his coat. "Guess we're figuring this out together." The barn lights flickered when she switched them on that evening. The air had grown sharper, colder, signaling that another frost was coming. She scattered fresh hay, refilled the water bucket, and watched Chance settle into the straw. As she turned to leave, something caught her eye. A faint indentation in the dirt behind the barn, shaped by tires. Fresh ones. They curved around the building, stopping exactly at the spot where the disputed property line supposedly was. Emma stepped closer, kneeling in the cold soil. Someone had been there, recently, watching the land, measuring it. Her pulse quickened. She straightened slowly, glancing toward the dark tree line beyond the fence. The quiet fields looked empty, but something in her gut twisted. Someone wanted the land behind her barn badly enough to come in the night. And if they were bold enough to trespass, this wasn't just a paperwork issue anymore. Chance stirred inside the barn, letting out a soft whinny that broke the silence. Emma swallowed hard and forced herself to breathe. "Whatever this is," she whispered, "we'll face it. One step at a time." She didn't yet know that the colt she'd rescued would lead her straight to the truth hidden beyond that fence, a truth the town had ignored for years, and one that would soon force Willow Creek to choose sides. Morning came with a heavy chill that settled into the ground and into Emma's bones. The frost outside sparkled like shattered glass across the fields, and thin clouds of breath drifted from Chance's nostrils as she checked on him. He looked a little brighter today, Still fragile, still exhausted, but brighter. His ears perked when she entered, and he shifted his weight as if trying to stand on legs that weren't ready for much yet. "You're fighting," she whispered, brushing her fingers through his coarse mane. "Good. I need you to keep doing that." She fed him slowly, small handfuls at a time, the way Hank instructed. The barn was quiet except for his soft chewing and the occasional creak of wood expanding in the cold. But Emma's mind refused to settle. She couldn't stop thinking about the tire tracks behind the barn, how deliberate they looked, how recent. Someone had stood on her property, right where the dispute was centered. Someone was watching. After the kids left for school, Emma finally forced herself to face the letter again. She unfolded it at the kitchen table, the worn wood covered in scratches and old crayon marks from nights when June drew while Emma paid bills. The notice made her chest tighten all over again. A boundary discrepancy, a pending review, a potential financial liability. Cold, official language masking something much more personal. Whoever initiated the claim knew she couldn't afford a lawyer, couldn't afford a fight, couldn't afford anything beyond survival. She rubbed her temples, staring at the coffee mug in her hands, wishing she had stronger answers or stronger nerves, preferably both. A loud knock jolted her upright. She opened the door to find Mark Dillon, the town's unofficial busybody, and the man who owned several parcels of land surrounding hers. He stood on her creaking porch with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well, Emma," he said, tipping his hat with exaggerated politeness. "Heard you been real busy." Her stomach clenched. She had always disliked the way Mark looked at her house, as if he could already see his name written across the deed. "What do you want, Mark?" she asked, folding her arms. "Just checking in," he replied, stepping a little closer than she liked. "Heard you got one of those county notices. Figured that must be stressful for a single mom." Emma bristled. "It's nothing I can't handle." "Sure," he said, glancing toward the barn. "And I hear you bought yourself a sickly colt with your last dollars. Interesting priorities." Anger swelled in her, sharp and unexpected. "My priorities aren't your business." "Everything in this town is everybody's business," he replied with a smug shrug. "You know how it works." She stepped forward just enough to block his view. "Say what you came here to say." Mark's smile grew thinner. "Fine. I'm interested in buying the strip of land behind your barn. It'd straighten my fence line and keep things tidy. Since you're clearly having trouble keeping up with this place, selling a little piece could help you out." There it was, the real reason he'd come. "I'm not selling," she said immediately. "You haven't even heard my offer." "I don't need to," she replied. "That land stays with the property." Mark's eyes hardened. For now. A current of cold air swept between them, a warning, a promise. He tipped his hat again. "Suit yourself," he said lightly, though irritation crackled beneath the surface. "But don't say nobody tried to help when the county steps in." He stepped off the porch and walked back to his truck. Before getting in, he paused and looked toward the back of her land again, right where the tire tracks had been. Then he drove off. Emma's heart hammered as she closed the door. For a long moment she leaned against it, trying to catch her breath. She'd always suspected Mark wanted that land, but suspicion was different from confirmation. Now she knew for certain. And if he had been the one trespassing, if he had been the one pressing the county, she clenched the letter in her hand. She couldn't let him push her out. She went to the barn needing air, needing reassurance, needing something that grounded her. Chance lifted his head the moment she stepped inside. He let out a quiet nicker that felt strangely like comfort. She knelt beside him, resting a hand against his neck. "You picked a wild time to come into my life," she said, with a shallow laugh. "But I'm glad you're here." The colt blinked slowly, leaning into her touch like he understood. Later that day, Hank returned. He didn't even make it to the barn before Emma stepped outside to meet him. "You were right," she said. "Someone is pushing it. Mark Dillon showed up this morning. He wants the land." Hank's jaw tightened. "Of course he does. He's been eyeing that strip for years, figures you're vulnerable. He also brought up the colt," she added. "Like I made a mistake." "You didn't," Hank said firmly. "And folks like Mark only smell weakness when they're looking for reasons to take what isn't theirs." Emma nodded, grateful for the support she hadn't realized she needed. "The county notice said something about old surveys. That land's been a mess on paper since the 90s, Hank explained. "But here's the thing. Your barn sits right on the edge of the original line, not the adjusted one. If Mark's filing a claim, he's using the newer maps, the bad ones." "So what do I do?" she asked. "I'm working on getting a copy of the original survey," Hank said. "If we can prove the county records are wrong, his whole claim falls apart." Emma inhaled shakily. "Thank you, really." "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Like I told you, long road ahead." They walked into the barn together. Hank helped her administer Chance's next dose of antibiotics. The colt flinched but handled it better than the day before. Strength was returning slowly, like sunlight creeping across a cold field. "You picked a good name," Hank said, watching the colt rest his head against Emma's shoulder. "Chance suits him." The barn grew quiet again after Hank left. Emma stayed there long after dark, sitting in the straw beside Chance, listening to the gentle rhythm of his breathing. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the dry grass and causing the barn door to sway slightly against its hinges. She stared toward the back wall, the one facing the disputed strip of land. Beyond that wall lay a piece of earth someone wanted badly enough to fight her for, but she wasn't about to back down. Not now, not after everything she'd survived to keep her kids safe, and not after the little colt she saved with her last 220 had given her something she hadn't felt in a long time: resolve. Chance nudged her gently, as if sensing the shift inside her. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, running her hand along his neck. "No matter what they're planning, we'll handle it." But what she didn't yet know, what no one in Willow Creek knew, was that the land dispute wasn't the real story at all. The real story was what lay buried beneath that strip of land. And Chance, the frail colt she'd rescued by instinct alone, would soon lead her directly to it. The next few days settled into a fragile rhythm, one built around feedings, medications, and constant anxious hope. Chance grew a little stronger with each sunrise. He still trembled when he stood, still tired quickly, but he stood longer each time. Emma clung to those small victories, the way someone clings to rope in rising water. The barn had become her refuge, a place where judgment couldn't reach her, where the county's threat felt distant, and where the world narrowed to the slow, stubborn heartbeat of a colt who refused to give up. On Thursday morning, just after she dropped the kids at school, she grabbed her work gloves and stepped behind the barn to check the fence line. She hadn't been able to shake the thought of those tire tracks. The frost had melted 2 days earlier, erasing any new clues, but the pressure in her chest remained. She walked the narrow strip of land slowly, scanning the ground, the trees, the fence posts. Her boots crunched against the frozen soil as she reached the far corner, an area she rarely visited. The land felt different here, quieter somehow, the air stiller between the tall pines. As she scanned the ground, something caught her eye, a section of earth that looked slightly disturbed. Not a large area, just a patch where the soil seemed darker, looser, as if someone had dug there recently. She crouched down, brushing aside a thin layer of dead pine needles. The dirt shifted easily beneath her fingers. Someone had dug here, she was sure of it. A chill climbed her spine. Before she could examine it further, the distant rumble of a truck pulled her attention toward the road. Hank's blue pickup came into view, turning down her long driveway. Emma stood and wiped her hands on her jeans, glancing once more at the disturbed soil before heading back toward the barn. Hank climbed out of his truck with a folder tucked under his arm. His face held a mix of determination and something else, something like concern. "I got it," he said, tapping the folder. "The original survey map, the real one." Emma exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "And? Well, it's good and bad." Hank motioned for her to follow him into the barn. Chance lifted his head at their entrance, ears flicking. Hank ran a gentle hand over the colt's neck. "Look at you," he muttered softly. "Still proving people wrong." Emma leaned against the stall door. "Tell me about the survey." Hank opened the folder across a bale of hay and unfolded a large, yellowed map. The edges were worn, and the ink had faded, but the lines were still visible. "This is from '93, Hank said. Before the mix-up, her eyes traced the heavy black lines marking the boundaries. The barn stood inside the property, but the disputed strip behind it, the one Mark wanted, was clearly part of her land. "So this proves it," she said, hope rising. "The county has to accept this, right?" Hank hesitated. "That's where the bad part comes in," he said. "This map was never digitized. Somehow it never got entered into the county's new system. So as far as the online records show, the adjusted lines are the official ones. Meaning this," he tapped the map, "is technically outdated in their eyes." Emma swallowed. "But it's the truth. Truth and paperwork rarely match," Hank said quietly. "But it's still a starting point. Enough to challenge the claim." Her relief dimmed but didn't disappear. A starting point was more than she had yesterday. "I'll go to the county office tomorrow," she said. "Show them this." Hank nodded. "I'll go with you. You shouldn't be dealing with this alone." She felt her throat tighten. Support wasn't something she was used to accepting, but right now, she needed it. "Thank you," she whispered. They were interrupted by the sharp trill of Emma's phone. She glanced at the screen. An unknown number. Her stomach dipped. She stepped outside the barn to answer it. "Hello?" A man's voice, clipped and formal, filled her ear. "Ms. Carter? This is Deputy Rawley with the County Sheriff's Department. I'm calling about a report of trespassing filed near your property." Emma's heart pounded. "What report?" "The complainant didn't identify you specifically," the deputy said, "but he alleges interference with land he believes is under boundary dispute." Her blood ran cold. "Mark Dillon," she said under her breath. "We'll need to talk with both parties," the deputy continued. "I'll be stopping by later today." She closed her eyes. "All right, I'll be here." When the call ended, she stood motionless for a moment, staring out at the frost-covered grass, the quiet fields stretching beyond the fence. Fear crept up her spine, not the panic of losing money or facing judgment, but the deeper fear that someone was actively trying to push her off her land. She walked back into the barn. Hank read her expression instantly. "That was the sheriff?" he asked. She nodded, explaining the call. Hank muttered a curse under his breath, something low and sharp. "He's playing dirty," Hank said. "Real dirty." Emma clenched her fists. "Why now? Why is he pushing this so hard?" "I've known Mark for years," Hank said. "He doesn't make a move unless he stands to gain something big, something he doesn't want anyone else knowing about." Emma's mind flashed back to the disturbed soil behind the trees, a patch dug recently, a spot that didn't belong to Mark but that he desperately seemed to want. "Hank," she said slowly, "can you take a look at something with me?" They walked behind the barn together. Emma led him to the patch of earth she'd found earlier. Hank crouched, running his calloused fingers through the loose soil, his brows pulled together. "This wasn't done long ago," he said quietly. "Couple days at most. Depth looks intentional, like someone was checking something or burying something." Emma's pulse quickened. Why would he come back here to dig? What could be so important? Hank stood, brushing dirt off his hands. The wind cut across the field, carrying the sharp scent of pine. "Whatever it is," he said, "Mark doesn't want you finding it, that much is clear." Emma glanced toward her barn. Chance nickered faintly from inside, as if sensing her tension. "He'll be back," she whispered. "Won't he?" "Not openly," Hank said. "He's too careful for that, but I'd bet good money he's watching every move you make." Emma wrapped her arms around herself, the cold finally sinking in. Chance had brought her hope, but he had also brought her straight into the middle of something bigger than she understood, and she was starting to wonder whether saving the frail colt wasn't just fate or instinct, but the beginning of uncovering a truth Mark Dillon would do anything to keep buried. The deputy arrived just after noon, his cruiser rolling to a stop beside the barn. The dust settled slowly around the tires as Deputy Rawley stepped out, a tall man with a weathered face and the cautious posture of someone used to walking into tense conversations. He gave a polite nod when Emma stepped out of the barn to meet him. "Ms. Carter," he said, "thanks for being available." "Of course," she replied, though her voice felt tighter than she meant. "Come on in. I'll answer whatever I can." Hank appeared behind her, wiping his hands on a cloth. His presence made Emma feel steadier. Rawley's gaze shifted to him. "Mr. Morrissey, didn't know you were involved." "I'm here as support," Hank said, "and as someone who knows this land's history better than most." Rawley nodded but didn't comment further. He followed Emma and Hank into the barn. Chance stood in his stall, more alert today, ears perked toward the unfamiliar voice. The deputy paused, studying the colt. "This the animal you purchased at the auction?" "Yes," she said quietly. "His name is Chance." "Well," Rawley said, softening just a touch, "he looks better than I expected considering what I heard." Emma wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or embarrassed. She forced a small smile anyway. The deputy turned serious again. "I need to ask a few questions about the land behind your barn. A complaint was filed claiming someone entered the disputed area without permission." Hank straightened. "That's nonsense. Emma owns this land." "That's what we're here to clarify," Rawley said. "Boundary disputes get messy. Until it's settled, both parties have to be cautious." Emma took a breath. "Deputy, I haven't trespassed anywhere. I walked the property I've been paying rent on for 4 years. That's it." Rawley watched her closely as if measuring her honesty. "Did you disturb any soil or dig anything in that area?" "No," she said firmly. "But someone else did." That caught his attention. "Explain." Emma motioned for him to follow her. The wind picked up as they walked behind the barn, carrying the crisp smell of pine and distant wood smoke. They reached the disturbed patch of soil. Rawley crouched and examined it silently. "This wasn't done recently," he said after a moment. "Within the last week, yes, but not within the last day or two." Emma's stomach tightened. "I didn't do it." Rawley stood again, brushing dirt off his hands. "I'm not accusing you. I'm here to understand why this was done at all." "Mark Dillon's behind it," Hank said. "He's been after this strip of land for decades." Rawley blew out a slow breath. "I can't make assumptions without evidence." "Then look at the evidence," Hank pressed. "Why is he filing a trespass complaint while digging holes on land he doesn't own?" Rawley's jaw shifted, the slightest hint of discomfort showing. Emma realized then that small towns didn't just pass around rumors, they passed around loyalties, and Mark Dillon had plenty of sway. Still, Rawley finally nodded. "I'll speak with Mr. Dillon, and until this is resolved, I'd advise you both to avoid the disputed area." "I won't go near it," Emma said, "but I won't let anyone else keep sneaking onto my land either." Rawley gave her a measured look. "Understood. I'll update you once I've spoken with him." He tipped his hat lightly, then walked back to his cruiser and drove off. Gravel crunched under the tires until the sound faded completely. Emma let out a breath she'd been holding for minutes. He didn't sound convinced. "He's stuck in the middle," Hank said. "Doesn't mean he won't do his job, but don't expect him to pick sides." Emma rubbed her arms against the cold. "It feels like Mark's already 5 steps ahead." "Maybe," Hank said, "but he's also sloppy when he thinks he's winning. That gives us a chance." Chance let out a soft nicker from inside the barn, as if calling her back to something simpler, steadier. Emma walked toward him, resting her hand on his muzzle. The colt leaned into her touch, his breath warm against her palm. "You're doing better," she whispered. "Thank God." Hank watched them thoughtfully. "Animals know things," he said. "They feel what's around them. They notice what we don't." Emma glanced back at the disturbed soil. "Do you think chance was what made me stop at the auction that day? Like I knew—" She cut herself off. She didn't want to sound irrational, and she didn't want Hank thinking she was grasping at something mystical. But Hank understood anyway. "Maybe you recognized a fight in him," he said gently. "Same one you've got in you." Emma swallowed hard. The unfamiliar pressure behind her eyes made her look away. She didn't want to cry. Not now when she needed clarity. Hank checked Chance one more time, then stepped outside to leave. "I'll see you tomorrow. We've got a county office to visit." When he drove off, the farm fell quiet again. The cold afternoon light filtered through the barn slats, catching dust in golden streaks. Emma sank onto a bale of hay and exhaled, long and slow. She tried to focus on the good, the foal gaining strength, Hank's support, the map that proved she wasn't wrong. But the unease gnawed at her. Someone had dug behind her barn. Someone had filed a complaint. Someone was pushing the county to act fast. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, expecting a message from Lydia, or perhaps another number she didn't recognize, but instead, it was a notification from her old trail camera, the one she'd mounted years ago near the back fence and forgotten about because she rarely had time or reason to check it. It had detected motion during the night, motion near the disputed strip of land. Her chest tightened. She opened the feed with trembling fingers. The first photo loaded slowly, grainy, dark, a figure partially obscured by shadows. The second image was clearer. It showed a man standing exactly where the soil had been disturbed. A man with Mark Dillon's build, Mark Dillon's jacket, Mark Dillon's hat. Emma's breath caught. There was no mistaking him. He hadn't filed a complaint out of concern. He'd filed it to cover his tracks. Her fear sharpened into something else, something hotter, steadier, resolve. She stared at the photo until her pulse steadied, then turned toward the stall where Chance stood watching her. "We're not letting him win," she whispered. "Not this time." Chance shifted closer, and Emma laid her hand against his neck, grounding herself in the quiet strength of the animal she'd saved with her last $220. She didn't know what Mark was looking for out there. She didn't know why he was so desperate to get that land. But she knew one thing now with absolute certainty. Whatever he wanted was buried in the soil behind her barn, and he wasn't going to stop until he got it. Emma didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, listening to the wind scrape against the old siding, her mind replaying the trail camera images again and again. Mark standing in the shadows, Mark digging on her land, Mark filing a complaint the very next day. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't misunderstanding. It was intent. Around 4 a.m., she finally gave up on sleep and slipped into her boots. The house was cold, the kind of deep cold that settled in after a long Idaho night. She wrapped her coat tighter around her and stepped outside. Frost glittered across the grass, crunching softly under her feet as she headed toward the barn. Chance lifted his head the moment she opened the door. Even in the dim glow of the single bulb overhead, she could see it. He looked different, stronger, a little more present. His eyes focused on her, curious rather than fearful. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered, rubbing his muzzle. "I needed to see you." Chance pressed his weight into her hand, and for a moment, Emma let her forehead rest gently against his. His breath was warm, steady, grounding. She didn't know why this fragile colt calmed her the way he did, but the effect was undeniable. Something about Chance made her feel less alone in all of this. By sunrise, she had made up her mind. She wasn't waiting for the county or the sheriff or anyone else to save her. She was walking into that office today with Hank, with the old survey, and with the trail camera images saved in her phone. She would not be pushed off her land. The kids came into the kitchen sleepy-eyed and yawning. Lucas noticed the tightness around her mouth but didn't ask. June climbed into Emma's lap and curled into her chest, as if sensing she needed comfort too. "Does Chance feel better today?" June mumbled. "He does," Emma said softly. "A little more each day." Lucas nodded, relieved. "I knew he would." After dropping them at school, she met Hank outside the barn. He'd arrived early, his jaw set, his stance solid. For the first time since this started, she realized how much she had been relying on his presence. "You ready?" he asked. She nodded. "As ready as I can be." He held the passenger door open for her, and they drove toward the county building, a squat brick structure near the center of Willow Creek. On the way, Emma kept replaying what she planned to say. She wanted to sound confident, but her voice trembled every time she rehearsed it. Hank must have noticed. "You're doing the right thing," he said. "And hey, whatever happens in there, we handle it, one step at a time." She nodded, swallowing the tightness in her throat. Inside, the county office smelled faintly of old paper, and coffee burned too long on a hot plate. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, giving everything a slightly yellow tint. A receptionist directed them to a small meeting room where a county assessor named Mrs. Hollingsworth sat waiting. Her glasses perched low on her nose, and her expression suggested she had already made up her mind before Emma even sat down. "Miss Carter," she said, folding her hands, "I understand there's concern regarding a boundary discrepancy." "Yes," Emma replied, forcing her voice to stay steady. "I have the original survey map, and I want to challenge the current claim." Hank laid the map on the table. Mrs. Hollingsworth adjusted her glasses and studied the faded lines. She took her time, too much time, Emma thought, before finally leaning back in her chair. "This is certainly older," she said slowly, "but it's not in our digital system. That complicates things." "It doesn't complicate the truth," Hank said. "Those newer maps are wrong." Mrs. Hollingsworth pursed her lips. "I didn't say the claim was valid, only that we have to follow procedure." Emma felt her pulse quicken. "And what is the procedure?" "An on-site reassessment," the woman replied. "I'll need to visit the property myself. Both parties will be notified of the date." Emma stiffened. "Both parties meaning Mark Dillon, yes?" "He filed the claim. He has the right to be present." The words felt like a slap. Mark standing on her land again, this time legally, made her stomach twist. Hank leaned forward. "You need to know something." He glanced at Emma for permission, and when she nodded, he continued. "We have evidence he was out there at night, digging." Mrs. Hollingsworth's eyebrows rose. "Digging?" Emma pulled out her phone with trembling fingers and opened the trail camera images. She slid it across the table. The assessor stared at the screen. Her eyes sharpened, losing some of that practiced neutrality. "This was taken on your property?" she asked. "Yes," Emma said. "My camera, my land." "And you didn't authorize this man to be there?" "Absolutely not." Mrs. Hollingsworth exhaled, long and slow. "This changes things." Emma felt a flicker of hope. "I'll still need to schedule the reassessment," the assessor continued, "but I will also be notifying the sheriff of these photos. A claim filed by someone trespassing is questionable." Hank nodded. "That's one word for it." Mrs. Hollingsworth ignored the comment and stood. "Expect a formal notice within 48 hours. Emma thanked her softly and followed Hank out of the building. The air outside felt colder than before, but lighter somehow. "You did good," Hank said. "Did I?" Emma whispered. "You stood up for yourself," he replied. "That's more than most." They drove back to the farm in silence. When they pulled into the driveway, Emma felt an ache behind her eyes. Not from exhaustion, but from the weight of everything she had held inside for weeks. Chance called softly from the barn the moment she stepped out of the truck. Emma walked toward him, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp afternoon air. The colt stood when he saw her, wobbly, but determined. She stepped into the stall, and he pressed his face against her chest, warm and steady. Emma wrapped her arms around his fragile neck, letting the relief wash through her. "You're getting stronger," she whispered. "And maybe, I am too." As she held him, something glinted on the ground outside the barn, a small metallic shine near the corner post. Emma slowly walked over and crouched. It was a tool, a metal soil probe, the kind surveyors used, the kind Mark Dillon had no reason to leave behind, unless he'd been back again. Her fingers closed around the cold metal. Mark wasn't just pushing the county. He was racing against time, searching for something buried, something he didn't want her or anyone else to find. Emma straightened, her breath trembling in the cold air. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than a boundary dispute. And somehow chance had been the beginning of it all. Emma held the metal soil probe in her hand for a long moment, the cold from the steel biting into her skin. It wasn't rusted. It wasn't old. It was recently used and recently dropped. She turned it over slowly, noticing the faintest trace of damp soil still clinging to the tip, the kind of soil found in exactly one place behind her barn. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She looked toward the tree line. Everything was still, silent, ordinary. Yet the quiet felt wrong now, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Chance whinnied softly behind her, pulling her back to the present. Emma closed her fingers around the probe and headed back inside the barn. The colt leaned over the stall door to greet her, his ears flicking forward, his eyes bright with a curiosity that hadn't been there a week ago. "You're watching everything, aren't you?" she whispered, stroking his cheek. "I don't know how, but you saw something long before I did." Chance exhaled softly, as if agreeing. Emma tucked the soil probe onto a high shelf where the kids wouldn't reach it. She would show it to Hank, maybe even Deputy Rawley, but not yet. Not until she understood what exactly Mark Dillon was searching for. That night, the wind picked up again, rattling loose shingles on the roof and whistling through the cracks in the barn walls. Emma couldn't bring herself to go inside the house just yet. Instead, she sat on an overturned bucket in the corner of the barn, wrapped in a blanket, watching Chance settle into sleep. His breathing had become deeper, steadier, a small miracle in an otherwise unraveling week. She watched him for so long that the barn shadows shifted twice before she finally stood and stretched the stiffness from her legs. She shut off the lights and stepped outside. Then she froze. A set of fresh tire impressions cut across the dirt road near her mailbox, tires that hadn't been there earlier. She crouched, brushing her fingers along the pattern. The tread looked familiar, too familiar. Mark's truck. Her breath clouded in the cold air. Whoever had been here didn't stop long, just enough time to slow down, maybe watch the house and or the barn, before driving off. Emma stood quickly scanning the quiet road. No headlights, no engines. Nothing but the whisper of wind through the tall grass. The message was clear. Mark was circling, watching, waiting. She hurried inside and locked every door, her nerves buzzing long after she crawled into bed. Morning came too soon. A pale grey dawn seeped through the curtains, and Emma woke with the uneasy feeling that she hadn't truly slept at all. She dressed quickly and rushed to the barn before the kids were awake. Chance stood when he saw her, weaker from the night, but still steady enough to take a few steps toward her. His coat looked a little shinier today, his body filling out the slightest bit. Every improvement tugged at her heart. "You're going to make it," she whispered. "I'm starting to believe it." She fed him, brushed him, checked his temperature, all the motions grounding her before facing another day of decisions she didn't want to make. Hank's truck pulled into the driveway just as she was finishing. She stepped outside to greet him, the morning air cold enough to sting her cheeks. He climbed out with a tight expression. "Got your message about the probe? Let me see it." Inside the barn, she handed it to him. Hank inspected it with a practiced eye. "This is professional grade," he muttered. "Not something most people just own. What the hell is he doing out here?" "You think he's looking for something specific?" she asked. "I do," Hank said. "And if he's this desperate, it's something he doesn't want found by anyone else." Emma rubbed her arms, trying to shake the cold settling deeper into her. "Maybe the reassessment will stop him." Hank didn't answer immediately. He turned the probe over again and sighed. "I can't promise that. If Mark thinks he's running out of time, he might get bolder." Emma felt her stomach sink. "What do we do?" "We wait for the county to set the date," Hank said, "and we keep our eyes open. He's not subtle, but he is determined." Before Emma could respond, the barn door creaked open and Lydia rushed inside, out of breath and visibly shaken. Emma stepped forward immediately. "Lydia? What's wrong?" Lydia held up her phone with trembling hands. "You need to see this. Right now." Emma took the phone and stared at the image on the screen. It was a post from a local community group, one of those small-town online forums where gossip spread faster than facts. The post showed a blurry photo of Chance, taken the day Emma had brought him home. The caption read, "Some people shouldn't be allowed to take in animals they can't afford. This colt deserves better." Hundreds of comments followed, some sympathetic, most judgmental, some even cruel. Emma's throat tightened. She'd survived a lot of hard years, but public shaming was a wound she hadn't expected. "Who posted this?" she whispered. "Anonymous," Lydia said, anger flashing in her eyes. "But we all know who sent it in. Mark." He was trying to paint her as irresponsible, as incompetent, as someone who couldn't be trusted to care for an animal, let alone land. Hank's jaw locked. He's building a case, public opinion, county pressure, fabricated concerns. He's trying to corner you. Emma's hands trembled as she lowered the phone. "I saved Chance. He would have died if I hadn't stepped in." "People who don't know you don't care," Lydia said softly. "They just react." Emma turned toward the stall, watching Chance lower his head into the hay. The colt who had become the center of everything, her hope, her fear, her fight. "He's not taking this from me," Emma whispered. "He's not taking my land. He's not taking Chance." Hank nodded. "Then you need to be ready. Because if I'm right, whatever is buried out there is the real reason he wants the land." Emma stared at him. "What do you think it is?" "I don't know," Hank said. "But it's something old, something he's known about for a long time." A quiet fell over the barn as the weight of his words settled between them. Chance turned his head then, slow, deliberate, and looked toward the back wall of the barn, toward the disputed land, toward the place where the soil had been disturbed, as if he knew exactly where all their problems began. Emma followed his gaze and a chill traced her spine. She wasn't imagining it. Chance had been staring in that direction since the day she brought him home. And maybe, just maybe, he had been trying to tell her something all along. Whatever was buried out there, whatever Mark was desperate enough to trespass, dig, lie, and manipulate for, it was close. Too close. And Emma now understood something with absolute clarity. The fight for that land was no longer just about property. It was about truth, and she was getting close enough that Mark Dillon might finally feel threatened. The county's reassessment notice arrived 2 days later. Emma found the envelope wedged in her mailbox early that morning, the paper stiff with cold, the printed text crisp and final. Property review scheduled. Friday, 10 a.m. Both parties required to be present. 2 days. 48 hours until Mark Dillon stood on her land again, this time with legal permission and with the county watching. Emma folded the letter carefully, though her hands shook the whole time. She slipped it into her jacket pocket and looked toward the barn. A faint stream of warm breath curled through the cracks in the boards. Chance was awake. She took a breath that tasted like frost and fear and determination all at once. "Okay," she whispered to herself. "We're doing this." Inside the barn, Chance greeted her with a soft nicker. His body was still thin, still recovering, but the weakness had shifted into something steadier. The trembling in his legs came less frequently now. His eyes followed her with a clarity she hadn't seen before. "You're getting stronger right when I need strength the most," she said, rubbing his neck. "Good boy." She fed him, checked his temperature and brushed him until his coat gleamed faintly under the dusty shaft of morning light, slicing through the boards. Every small improvement felt like a victory. Every small breath reminded her why she had fought so hard. Around mid-morning, Hank arrived. He stepped into the barn and glanced immediately at Chance. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, impressed. "He looks 10 pounds heavier than he did 2 days ago." Emma smiled faintly. "I think he's finally turning a corner." "He's doing his part," Hank said. "Now we do ours." Emma handed him the reassessment letter. He read it once, his mouth tightening, then folded it neatly. "He'll be there," Hank said flatly. "Mark doesn't miss an opportunity to corner someone." "I know," Emma whispered. "We'll be ready," Hank replied. "But there's one thing still bothering me. Whatever he's looking for out there, it's not small, and it's not random." Emma exhaled shakily. "I keep thinking about the digging, the soil that looked disturbed even before the camera caught him out there, and the probe he dropped." Hank nodded. "Exactly. You don't use a probe unless you're searching for something beneath the surface." "Like what?" she asked. "Could be old drainage lines, buried fencing, utility markers," Hank said. "Or something someone hid." Emma felt her chest tighten. "You think he's after something buried decades ago?" "I think," Hank said carefully, that Mark knows something the rest of the town forgot, something tied to that land long before you ever stepped foot here. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from Lydia lit up the screen. "Emma, call me ASAP." Emma stepped outside the barn and dialed. Lydia answered on the first ring, her voice low and shaken. "Are you okay?" Emma asked quickly. "No," Lydia whispered. "And I'm not sure you will be either. I heard something. You need to know this." Emma's stomach dropped. "Tell me." "It came from my cousin. She works at the county office," Lydia said. "She overheard Mark arguing with someone yesterday in one of the conference rooms. He was angry, really angry." "About what?" He said, "I'm not losing that land over some girl and her half-dead horse. I know it's there. I'm getting it back." Emma went cold. "Getting what back?" "He didn't say," Lydia replied. "But he sounded desperate, obsessive, like he's been after this for a long time." Emma's breath trembled. "Thank you, Lydia." "Be careful," Lydia said softly. "Please." Emma hung up and walked back into the barn. Her face must have given her away, because Hank stepped forward. "What happened?" She told him everything. The overheard argument, Mark's words, his obsession. Hank listened in silence. When she finished, he took off his hat slowly and ran a hand through his hair. "Emma," he said quietly, "this isn't just greed, this is personal." Her pulse stumbled. "But why? What does he think is buried out there?" Hank shook his head. "I don't know. But if he thinks it's rightfully his, and he's willing to lie, trespass, and smear your name to get it, then it's big." Chance let out a soft, restless sound, as if the tension seeped into him too. Emma stepped closer, running her hand along his neck, grounding herself in the warmth of the animal who had unknowingly thrust her into all of this. Hank's voice softened. "Emma, I need to ask something, and I need you to answer honestly." She turned toward him. "What is it? Have you noticed Chance reacting to that back area more than other places? Looking at it? Listening for something?" Emma froze. Yes, she had noticed. From day one. Even when Chance had barely been able to stand, his head always seemed to turn toward that strip of land, as if something there pulled at him, like instinct, like memory, like familiarity. "I thought I was imagining it," she whispered. "You weren't," Hank said. "Animals notice disturbances in the ground, vibrations, scents, things we don't pick up on. If something was buried there, metal, old equipment, even something with a scent marker, he might be responding to it." Emma looked toward the back wall of the barn, beyond which the disputed land stretched like a threat waiting to be revealed. "You think Chance is reacting to whatever Mark is after?" "I do," Hank said. The idea struck her harder than she expected. Chance, weak, trembling, abandoned, had been drawn to her, and maybe he had been drawn to this land too. Before she could respond, the sound of an engine rumbled down the driveway. A truck, heavy tires crunching over gravel. Emma's heart lurched. She rushed to the barn door. Mark Dillon's truck rolled to a stop near the fence. He stepped out slowly, wearing that same smug half-smile that had unsettled her the first day he'd shown up. Except now, there was something darker beneath it, something colder. He straightened his jacket and walked toward her with deliberate confidence. "Morning, Emma," he said. "Heard you've got the reassessment notice." Emma swallowed. "Get off my property, Mark." He chuckled. "Easy there. I just came to say I hope tomorrow goes smoothly. Wouldn't want any surprises." Hank stepped forward, placing himself between them. "You need something?" Mark smirked. "Not from you." His eyes slid back to Emma. "Just remember, land changes hands all the time around here. Nothing personal, it's just business." Emma's voice came out steadier than she felt. "You're not getting this land." Mark tipped his hat. "We'll see." He walked back to his truck, got in and drove away, slow enough to make sure she watched him go. When the dust settled, Emma realized her hands were shaking. Hank placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "We're close to something," he said. "Close enough that he's getting scared." Emma took a trembling breath, her gaze shifting toward the back strip of land. Tomorrow the county would stand there. Tomorrow Mark would stand there. Tomorrow the truth, whatever it was, might finally come to light. And standing quietly behind her, Chance lifted his head and stared again toward the disputed land, as if he knew the moment was coming. Friday arrived with a thin veil of fog blanketing the fields, turning the morning into a quiet, muted grey. Emma stood on her porch long before the county assessor was scheduled to arrive, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she couldn't make herself drink. The cold crept into her bones, but she barely felt it. Today was the day everything could shift. Her land, her home, her future, all decided by what lay beneath a strip of earth behind her barn. Inside the barn, Chance paced slowly, testing the strength in his recovering legs. He looked better, significantly better, than he had even a few days ago. His coat had gained a soft sheen, his ribs weren't as sharp beneath his skin, and his eyes had a spark that reminded her of the defiant colt who'd leaned against her at the auction. "You ready for whatever happens today?" she whispered, brushing her hand along his cheek. Chance pressed his forehead against her shoulder, something he had never done before. Not exactly fear, not exactly comfort, but a connection she felt down to her core. It steadied her in a way nothing else could. Hank's truck pulled into the driveway precisely at 9:30. He stepped out, wearing a clean jacket and a face that looked like it had spent the entire night preparing for a fight. "You holding up?" he asked. "Barely," she admitted. "Well," he said, "barely's enough, long as you keep standing." At 9:55, another set of tires rolled up the road. Mark Dillon's dark truck came into view, creeping down her driveway, with the slow, deliberate arrogance of someone convinced the world would bend for him. He parked, stepped out, and adjusted his hat as though he were stepping into a ceremony he expected to win. Emma felt Hank shift closer beside her. At 10:02, a county vehicle pulled in. Mrs. Hollingsworth stepped out with a clipboard and a calm professionalism that betrayed none of the tension humming beneath the surface. "Morning," she said. "Let's get started." They walked toward the back of the barn, the cold air thick with unspoken words. Mark trailed a few steps behind them, humming under his breath like he was already victorious. Mrs. Hollingsworth unfolded the survey maps, both the digital one and the original Emma and Hank brought. "We'll begin by identifying the exact markers listed on both records," she said. "Then we'll evaluate inconsistencies." They reached the first stake at the corner of the barn. The assessor marked it on her clipboard, then nodded toward the disputed area. "Next point is approximately 30 yards back." They continued deeper onto the strip of land, frost crunching under their boots, breaths forming small clouds. Emma's heart thudded harder with every step. Chance's stall faced the back of the barn. As they walked, Emma noticed him watching them through the open door, ears forward, alert. They stopped at the patch of disturbed soil, the same spot the trail camera had caught Mark digging. Mrs. Hollingsworth crouched beside it, brushing aside pine needles. "This soil was recently turned," she said. Mark stiffened. "Probably animals. Deer dig around here all the time." "No," she replied calmly. "This was done with a tool." Emma and Hank exchanged a glance. Mrs. Hollingsworth stood and pointed further toward the tree line. "According to the original survey, the third boundary marker should be near those pines. According to the digital map, it's 10 yards to the left. We'll confirm which is accurate." Mark cleared his throat. "We should follow the updated map. The county uses digital records now." "And we will review both," she cut in sharply. Mark's jaw clenched. They reached the pines, but something made Emma stop short. A thin glint of metal peeked through the frost near one of the roots. She knelt. Hank stepped close behind her. "What is it?" Emma brushed away the frost and dirt. A rusted corner of something rectangular emerged. She pulled gently, loosening the soil around it. The object lifted with a soft crackle of breaking frost. A metal box. Old, heavy, locked with a corroded clasp. Emma's pulse spiked. She stood slowly, gripping the box with both hands. "What is that?" Mrs. Hollingsworth asked. Mark's face drained of color. "That's nothing. Probably trash. Some old toolbox." "This is exactly where you were digging," Hank said, voice tightening, "and exactly where the old survey says the boundary runs." "Give me that," Mark snapped, stepping forward. Hank blocked him with a firm arm to the chest. "She found it. She opens it." Mrs. Hollingsworth raised a hand. Everyone stepped back. "This is now part of the active boundary investigation." Mark's eyes flicked from the box to the disturbed soil to Emma. Panic churned behind them, barely hidden beneath attempted calm. Emma's hands shook as she worked the clasp open. The lid creaked, metal grinding softly before giving way. Inside lay a stack of folded papers wrapped in aging plastic. Beneath them was a small leather ledger, cracked with time. Mrs. Hollingsworth pulled on gloves before handling the documents. She lifted the first page, unfolding it carefully. Her eyes widened. "These are land deeds," she said. "Original land deeds from the early cattle settlements." Hank inhaled sharply. "Let me see." The assessor handed him one page. His eyes scanned the faded text. "Emma," he said, voice thickening, "this land, all of this land, including the strip behind your barn, was assigned to the Carter family line over 70 years ago, before the divisions, before the updates, before Mark's family ever purchased their property. Emma froze. What? This is your family's land, Hank said, looking at her with something like awe. Someone in your line owned it. It was never formally transferred. It should have been yours all along. Mark lunged forward. That's impossible. That land belonged to my grandfather. Mrs. Hollingsworth shook her head. According to these documents, no, it did not. And your grandfather filed the adjusted survey after these deeds disappeared. Emma looked at the box, buried, hidden, preserved. Not trash, not forgotten, hidden. And Mark had known something was there. He had been searching for it, digging for it, trying to claim it before anyone else knew. Chance nickered loudly from the barn, almost like he understood the shift in the air. Emma pressed a hand to her mouth. Her knees wobbled. My family, she whispered. They never told me. Maybe they didn't know, Hank said softly. Or maybe someone didn't want them to. Mark's face twisted. This doesn't prove anything. Those documents could have been planted. They're notarized, Mrs. Hollingsworth said firmly. Dated, logged, and legally binding. She closed the metal box with finality. This boundary dispute is resolved. Effective immediately. Emma stared at her, breath unsteady. You are the rightful owner of the disputed land, the assessor continued. Mr. Dillon's claim is invalid, and an investigation will be opened into his unauthorized disturbance and trespassing. Mark's mouth opened, but no words came out. Hank placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. Chance let out a soft, triumphant sound, stamping one hoof as if echoing the verdict. Emma's eyes welled, but her voice emerged steady. I'm done being afraid of you, she said to Mark. He looked at her, anger, disbelief, and something like fear flickering beneath his expression, then turned and walked briskly to his truck. Gravel spat under his tires as he sped away. Silence settled over the land, and then Emma breathed, not the shallow, anxious breaths she'd been living on for weeks, a real one, a full one, the kind that fills a person who finally understands they're safe. Chance nudged her shoulder gently, and Emma turned to him with a trembling smile. You brought me here, she whispered. You brought me to this. Chance blinked slowly, leaning into her hand. Emma stood with Hank beside her, the assessor packing up the documents that would officially restore her family's land. The truth had been buried for decades, and the frail colt she saved with her last $220 had led her straight to it.